Hello everyone, and welcome back to the boiler sessions on low pressure boilers. This particular session is probably session 12, something like that. And I compliment you if you've went all through the boiler classes and watched all the videos on my YouTube series. If you've read the books and the workbooks and study guides, applied yourself, I congratulate you on doing that. It'll go a long ways toward you being a good, safe boiler operator. Those of you that don't know and maybe just happened in on this here particular video, I'm Ben Weekly. I'm a boiler instructor in northern Minnesota. I've operated boilers and conducted boiler classes in northern Minnesota for close to 30 years now. And one thing that has been my passion is to try to get a YouTube series out that those that are aspiring to get a license and become boiler operators, or those that want to test up and get a higher boiler license. My aspirations were to create a video series that would assist people in doing that, both men and women. So this particular session is a session that pretty much is for those people that are going to be operating in the state of Minnesota. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the governing agency that governs boilers and boiler operators and licensing and all of that in our state of Minnesota, and commonly called the Boiler Division. But technically, it's the CAIS. Now, this is a sheet you can take a look at, and I'll cover these topics. But CAIS stands for Code Administration and Inspection Services. Now, they are part of the Department of Labor and Industry here in Minnesota, and they cover all types of boilers, both low and high pressure, and they also govern and are responsible for the oversight of pressure vessels. A lot of different types of pressure vessels are out there in our state, and the CAIS governs the operation of those and the inspection of them if it's appropriate. So you say, what's a pressure vessel? Well, the most common would be air compressors. There are other pressure vessels as well. There's acetylene tanks and fire extinguishers, and anything that is a container that has pressure in it comes under the jurisdiction of the CAIS. Now, under the direction of the Chief Boiler Inspector, statutes and codes are written and enforced and endorsed sometimes by the legislature. Now, the difference between a code and a statute is a code is something that is authorized to be produced and enforced by the Chief Boiler Inspector, and a statute is usually something that is a written language put together by experts in the field, and it's passed by both houses of the legislature here in Minnesota and signed off on by the governor. So breaking a statute is like breaking the law. So you need to know some of the statutes. When you get licensed, you need to properly operate your boilers so that you are not in violation of law. The CAIS, it commissions a team of competent and well-trained boiler inspectors. They conduct boiler and pressure vessel inspections throughout the state of Minnesota. I believe currently in Minnesota there is about 8 to 10 various districts, and each one of those districts has a boiler inspector that oversees the inspections and the installation of boilers in our state. And I'll be sharing with you some website information that can put you in touch with your boiler inspector in your particular area. The CAIS, they register boilers and pressure vessels, and they track the required inspections. So most of these pressure vessels and boilers need to be inspected on an annual basis. They keep track of that to make sure that their inspections are not forgotten, or that inspections are not being conducted properly. So they also conduct testing of individuals to ensure quality boiler operators for licensing. And that's what this video series is all about. Trying to help you as a boiler operator fully understand what you're dealing with, make you aware of the dangers, make you aware of some of the critical procedures that have to be taken place as you operate boilers so that you can operate them in a safe manner. Now, they also commission the R stamp. The R stands for repair. Any kind of major repair on a boiler in Minnesota has to go through the state boiler division. And anybody that conducts a repair, such as welding or major retubing or anything like that, those people have to be certified and commissioned by the state. And so once they do that, they receive what's called an R stamp from the state. And if they do any type of work on your boiler, all of that work and the description of it and the inspection of it is recorded with the state, and a boiler inspector comes and signs off and approves of that work. They also conduct hydrostatic tests of boilers. So most brand new installations, once everything is ready to go, the boiler inspector will be there. And a lot of times it's the mechanical people that are doing the installations that conduct a hydrostatic test of the boiler with the boiler inspector present, so he can see that this is done correctly. And so any type of reconditioning of boilers, like I say, welding patches, retubing, anytime a boiler is taken out of operation and restored to operation somewhere else, it needs to be registered and inspected. So that is a summary of our governing agency here in Minnesota. We're going to talk in great detail in this session about licensing and how to go about the applying for licensing here in Minnesota. And the next thing I want to do is take you to the website from the state and walk you through the various pages of the website so you become a little bit familiar with it, and so that you'll have the information so that you can get to it and you'll be able to print out your application and your affidavits if that's the case. And this website will give you a wealth of information concerning boiler operation and licensing here in Minnesota. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay, here we are at the computer. I want to show you how to get to the website for the Minnesota Boiler Division. First thing I'm going to do is just click in a search here for that department, www.minnesota dot DOLI dot MN dot gov, and we'll hit enter, and now we are at their website. Once you get to this website, there's a lot of different things that you can go to, but what we want to take a look at is right here. It's for workers and the public right there. Click on that, and this page will come up, and where we want to go to is boiler engineers. This has to do with licenses, exams, permits, registration certificates, historical boilers, and other things. So I'll click on that and we'll go to the next page. This next page is the boiler engineers page. And on this particular page, there's a lot of good information. If you need to contact a boiler inspector in your area, you can click on this here, highlighted verbiage here, contact your regional inspector. You click on that, a page will come up and you can find the boiler inspector and information, contact information for the person that is in charge of your area here in Minnesota. Right here, if you need to apply for a new license, you can click on that. Or if you want to renew a license, you can check on a license right here. So if you want to check and see if you're currently registered, you can check. Let's say you're wondering if your license is still valid, and you have, say, second class C license. You can go there and go into the appropriate areas and find your name and see if you're still licensed in Minnesota. Right here is registration certificates. So if you want to search for registration certificates in Minnesota, you would click on that. Typically you'd put in your business or school district numbers, or whatever government organization that you're affiliated with, perhaps the city and the address and so forth. And you can then print out a registration certificate if there's one there that's currently registered for your building, and it'll show all of your boilers and the pressure vessels that you might have and so forth in your locality or your location. And then you can take that registration certificate and post it in your boiler room. What we want to get to next is scroll down on this here page, and we'll take a look at to take an exam. So here we are, apply to take an exam. I'll click on that now and you'll see what comes up. So what comes up is boiler engineer's license exam application for all types. So no matter what type of boiler engineer license, this is the exam application that you would use. So I'll click on that and show you what that looks like. Here we come to a page. This is the examination application. And for all of them, the fee is $50. So you would fill this out. If you're testing for a special engineer's license, you will not need to have any sworn affidavit because you have not had any experience, and nobody has to attest to the fact that you've had experience. So as a special engineer, if you click this box right here, you would send in a check for $50. You would fill out the rest of this to the best of your ability. You put all this information in down here, and then you sign it and date it. I would make a copy for myself, and then you send this in, and the address is right up here. You can send it to those people right up there. Now, if you have any questions concerning this form, there's some contact information right there as well. So you can call them and talk to them about it. But it's pretty simple and straightforward. Now, if you're testing for anything above the special engineer's license, so we're talking about low pressure boilers, which would be the Class C. So we have the next step up from special engineer would be second Class C and first Class C, and then Chief C class. Okay, so if you want to apply to take those tests, then you have to have somebody attest to the fact and swear to the fact that you've had experience operating boilers, and you need to have an affidavit filled out. Now here's the form for the affidavit. You can print this out. I'd print a couple copies of it out, and the boiler applicant does not fill out the license affidavit. This has to be filled out by the person that is attesting to the fact that you've had that experience, and they know firsthand that you've had that experience. So they are the people that fill this out. So the person that fills this out and signs it, it needs to be filled out in front of a notary. So you don't fill this all out and sign it and then take it to the notary. That's not the way the process works. The notary has to know that you in fact signed this form before them and in the presence of them. So you can fill this out, but you cannot sign it until you are in front of a notary. So this here has to be taken care of, and you would sign this down here on that line, and the notary public signs it here and stamps it over there. Now there's some instructions beyond this on how to fill out the boiler affidavit. So take advantage of that. Print that out, and you can have that right there when you're filling out your boiler affidavit. So lots of information on on this particular website. I'm going to go back and I'm going to go down to schedule an exam. I'll click on that. Now, there are only a few places in Minnesota at the present time because of the COVID epidemic that we have. They are currently giving exams in St. Paul, New Ulm, and Duluth. In ordinary times, there are many more places in Minnesota, smaller locations where they also travel to conduct these exams. So this is per the order of the governor dated November 18th, 2020. So if we want to schedule an exam, for example, we'll click on this right here where it says you can schedule an exam online. Now, before you do that, you have to send in your application, and once you send that in and it gets approved, they will send information back to you. And that some of that information that you get back will have to be put into this location. So I'll click on this. And to actually schedule an exam now, you put in your application number that they would give you back, and then you type in your last 4 digits from your social security number,
and then you go down and you click on exam schedules. And that will bring you to the next sheet. I can't do this because I don't have these numbers, but if you click on that, it will show you the various exam sites that are available for taking the test, and they will show the various dates and times and locations, that type of stuff. Once you get the application back and approved, you have up to 1 year to take the exam. Okay, I'm going to go back. Now, once we're back here to the licensing, boiler engineers, I'm going to go one more back, and we're back to the boiler engineers site, and then we'll click on this boiler license classifications. This is a very important document that everybody should print out and keep. Now this here shows all the various licenses and information pertaining to them. For example, across the top here it shows the various licenses. It shows the special license, the second class C, which is low pressure, the first class C, which is low pressure, and Chief C. In this license here shows the minimum years that's required in order to take your tests. So like you can see, for a special, you do not need any particular experience. For a second class C, you need 1 year. First class C, you need 3 years. And a Chief C, you need 5 years. And each time you take those tests, somebody is going to have to fill out an affidavit that goes with your application that that person swears that they know and that you've had that experience. Now, right here are the various classes, and we've talked about that. All of the C class, low pressure. First class C, low pressure. And Chief C, low pressure. Now, the special license, you can operate both high and low pressure. So that's your introductory license, and people that get your special license, some of them may go into low pressure boilers, some of them may work in a boiler plant that has high pressure. Now right here is the maximum horsepower that you can be in charge of. As a special engineer, you can be in charge of up to 50 boiler horsepower. As a second class, up to 100. So you can double your horsepower when you go to the next class. And then from there to the first class C, you can go up to 500 boiler horsepower. And as a chief engineer, you're unlimited as to horsepower that you can be in charge of. Over in the next column is maximum horsepower as a shift engineer. And as a special, you can be a shift engineer up to 100 horsepower, but you have to, you see the asterisk there, you have to be under the direct supervision of a chief engineer of the plant. So they have to give you direct information and guide you as you operate the boiler. As a second class C, you can go up to 500 boiler horsepower. And then first class is unlimited now. And of course, the Chief C is unlimited in both of those categories. So now you can see what's taking place here. As a special operator, that's the first step. It's 50 boiler horsepower, and then it doubles to 100 as shift engineer. Then down here on second class C, it goes to 100 and then goes to 500. And then the 500 is down here on first class C, and then it becomes unlimited as a shift engineer. And then a chief engineer is unlimited on both. In this column here is the number of questions that that'll be on the exam. And for a special operator, there's 50. And for second class C, only 50. First class, 100 questions. And the chief engineer, 115. And of course, in all of these, you have to have at least a 70% passing grade. So for instance, a first class C, the 100 questions, you'd have to get 70 of those correct. And then there is a 30-day waiting period before you can apply and retake the test if you do not pass it. And of course, you have to pay the fee again. So the main point here is make sure that you've studied well, that you've applied yourself, that you know the material that you're studying for. And so when you go in, you can take and pass that test on the very first try. And there should be no reason why you shouldn't if you apply yourself. Okay, now if I was giving a class with people in front of me and not online, I would be asking for questions at this point. But just keep in mind that this is a great website. All this information is there. You can print this out and keep it for yourself. Now, one thing I'd like to say, if you're going in to take a test for, say, a special, you absolutely will get questions on what your maximum horsepower you can be in charge of. So now I just told you that. So that every day when you're studying boilers, you need to ask yourself, as a special operator, what can I be in charge of? And the answer is 50. You repeat that over in your mind, over and over, many times. And so that you don't get that question wrong. And you'll be asked what you can be in charge of as a shift engineer. You need to know that. It's important, more important actually than just taking a test. You need to know how much you can operate. As a second class, you're going to get questioned on how much your maximum horsepower that you can be in charge of and what you can be in charge of as a shift engineer. These numbers you should not get wrong. You need to ask yourself every day, what can I be in charge of whatever test classification you're going in to test. Those are two questions you should get right. And you just can't afford to drop questions that are so easy to learn and understand. Okay, well, I'm going to go back now. And we're going to go down to this here where it says license exam guides. We'll click on that. And that website has got a lot of useful information for boiler operators. Right here is a special boiler license study material. Isn't that great? The state is giving you information. So guess what? As a special boiler license applicant, you're going in to take a test, you're probably going to get questions on this material right here. So take advantage of that and take a look at that. And down at the bottom, your guide to safer boiler operation. I'm going to click on that and show you what that looks like. There it is. It shows boilers. And this here shows some of the various components on steam boiler as per on hot water boilers. So you can see, for instance, a steam boiler has a safety valve, low water fuel cutoff, a water column, so on and so forth. On the hot water boilers, they're talking about expansion tanks, low water fuel cutoffs, the different gauges that are on it, an operating aquastat, and a high limit safety aquastat. So this is a good comparison to show you the difference between steam and hot water. Now they're talking about some definitions here. Boiler water level, what are they talking about? What's the most important rule? Wow, there it is. Low water and feed water controls. Low water cutoff, evaporation test. Low water cutoff, slow drain tests for steam boilers. Of course, these are firing, water gauges, safety valves, blowdown valves, starting fires in your boiler, boiler room requirements, hot water systems. So if you're studying to take a test, make sure you take advantage. At least read these things through so a lot of this material will stick in your mind. Print these out and put them into your boiler books so that you have them if you're from Minnesota. It's very, very important. Okay, once again, let's go back. And this is the page, of course, that all hinges off of this page here at the Department of Labor and Industry website, Boiler Engineers. Okay, a lot of information here that I did not go over, but if you have questions, they'll help you. Call this number, or you can email them at various email addresses there and get the information from them. So the State Boiler Department is not in business to try to obstruct boiler operators. They're there to help you, and so make use, proper use of their resources. So go to this website, and as I guided you in the beginning, you go all the way back So once you put in the address, you will come to For Workers and the Public. You click on that. Then of course you go to Boiler Engineers page. And that's this page right here. And this is where you need to go. You can go through and you can look at all different things as regards to boiler operation in Minnesota. And you can go to, for instance, click on Codes and Laws, and this will show you the specific codes and laws as pertaining to the operation of boilers in Minnesota, the repair of boilers, and the installation of boilers, and so forth, the registration of them. It's all regulated and spelled out in these codes and laws. So take advantage of this website. It's a great tool for people in Minnesota to get familiar with boiler operation.
Okay, well that's a summary of the state website. I hope you learned something off of that and can make use of it in a timely manner. So we want to continue on here. When it comes to licensing in Minnesota, there's some particulars that you need to know. And I want to point you to the whiteboard that I have behind me. And up at the top here, it says 1 boiler horsepower is equal to the power to evaporate 34.5 pounds per hour water at 212 degrees, or 33,472 BTUs. Now you notice here with the asterisks, this is for engineering purposes. Engineers use these calculations when they try to determine what the boiler horsepower actual output needs to be when it comes to heating a building or achieving a certain process. So when it comes to licensing and on your application, you do not use the boiler horsepower figures that are listed on your boiler. There's separate recipes, so to speak, when it comes to licensing formulas for boilers here in Minnesota for the licensing. So if you use the boiler horsepower that's listed, if your boiler says 100 boiler horsepower on the nameplate or something, you disregard that when it comes to filling out your application. Now, one thing that we need to talk a little bit about, and that has to do with heating surface of a boiler. The heating surface of a boiler for conventional boilers, water tube and fire tube boilers, has to do with the products of combustion on one side with water on the other. So the square feet of heating surface in a boiler has products of combustion with heat on one side and water on the other. So the first thing we need to do when we're trying to figure out what the boiler horsepower for licensing is in Minnesota, the first thing we try to do is determine what the square feet of heating surface is. Generally speaking, that will be listed on the nameplate of the boiler somewhere. So that's very important. That boiler horsepower for licensing purposes in Minnesota, we're talking about that now, and it's boiler horsepower for all boilers connected to a common header. Has to be totaled. So the heating surface of the boiler is important. We need to be able to determine what that is, and we'll get into that in just a minute. And that has to do, the boiler horsepower is for licensing purposes here in the state of Minnesota. Now, if you have 3 boilers in your plant and they're connected to a common header, you will need to know what the total boiler horsepower. So you determine what the boiler horsepower for licensing on each boiler is, add that up, and we'll get into a formula to accomplish that. But the boiler horsepower of all boilers connected to a common header must be totaled. They all have to be in consideration. Now, if you have 2 or more separate boilers, the boiler with the highest BTU is used. So keep that in mind. If you are in a building and you have a boiler, large boiler in your boiler room, and you have another building that you take care of, and that has a different boiler, and maybe on a remote part of the building there's another separate boiler. And if they're not connected together, either on the steam or water lines, then the highest or the biggest boiler, that is the horsepower that you need to be able to be licensed for. And if you get licensed for that, of course, you'll be licensed for the smaller ones. So that's how that's taken care of in the state of Minnesota. So when it comes to studying these boiler videos and reading your material and stuff, take a little time. Don't be in a mad rush. Take your time and read through it. Try to find some undistracted time. Maybe get up early before every morning, an hour early, and invest in yourself. Give yourself some uninterrupted time so that you can spend time just concentrating on boiler information, or do it later in the evening, but don't be in a rush. Take your time, go through it. I'm always a little nervous of people that want to rush through, quickly take a test and pass it, then go operate a boiler, and by the time they get to the boiler, they've forgotten everything they tried to memorize to pass the test. So take advantage of these videos, take advantage of the material in the textbook and the study guide. Talk to your fellow boiler operators about what their knowledge base is, and learn inside and out the operation of your boiler. you'll be far better off in the long run. Now, let's go to the next board here. This particular board has to do with determining boiler horsepower for licensing in Minnesota. I do not know what other states do, but this is how we do it here in the great state of Minnesota. One formula that is used, and that has to do with total boiler horsepower equals the square feet of heating surface divided by 10. So total boiler horsepower is the square feet of heating surface divided by 10. That's a great formula. You probably want to write that down so that you can memorize that. You'll probably get that on your test. But just to give you an example, if you have 3 boilers here and they're all connected on a common header, and one has 50 square feet, another has 100 square feet, and this one's got 150 square feet. That equals a total of 300 square feet of heating surface. And you take the 300 divided by 10, and it equals 30 boiler horsepower. 30 boiler horsepower. Okay. Now you say, well, I can't find what the square feet of heating surface is on my boiler. There may be old original boilers dating back into the early 1900s that don't have a plate on it, and it doesn't say what the BTU or what the square feet of heating surface is. So what you have to do on those is, if you cannot determine what the square feet of heating surface is, you take the BTU input on the burner, the BTU input of the burner, and divide it by 67,000. That will give you the boiler horsepower. And if you got 1 or more boilers like that, then you have to add them up to get the total boiler horsepower. There's one more animal in the heating world with boilers, and that has to do with electric boilers in low pressure. Electric boilers are rated in kW. So 1 boiler horsepower is equal to 1 kW. Now, what is a kW? Well, a kW is 1,000 watts, thousands of watts it's rated in. So 1,000 watts is equal to 1 kW. You look at the nameplate on your electric boiler and it'll say 100.5 kW. So look for that if you're operating electric boilers. And so the total boiler horsepower is the number of kWs divided by 10. That's the formula that you will use to determine what total boiler horsepower. So when you go to fill in your application, you need to be able to find out what the total boiler horsepower of the boilers that you are operating. And you can potentially have a variation. You could potentially have an old boiler that you couldn't determine the boiler horsepower by the square feet of heating surface. So then this formula is used for that particular boiler. Then you may have others that have square feet of heating surface, and you use that one. And those are conventional boilers, probably natural gas, propane, or fuel oil. And then you have, maybe you've got an electric boiler somewhere in your building. And so you have to have the kW on that. But if they're tied together on a common header, you have to add those up. And if they are not tied together on a common header, then you have to determine which has the largest BTU or boiler horsepower, which one has the largest boiler horsepower, and you have to be licensed to operate that particular one. Now, having gone over that, let's talk a little bit about some particular things when it comes to the state of Minnesota. And being I'm reading here, I'm going to put my reading glasses on so I can fully understand what I'm looking at. And just want to let you know, because you could potentially get a question on some of this stuff when you take license tests in Minnesota. Anyway, these are just some brief things concerning Minnesota. The chief boiler inspector of our state, he has to have a Minnesota certificate of competency and a chief A boiler license and a commission from the national board. They have to have all three. And so that means that they're well trained, that they've had experience, and that they have proven themselves to be competent to be in that position. Very, very important position. Now, an insurance inspector in our state has to have a Minnesota certificate of competency and a commission from the national board. They do not need a Class A license. Only the chief boiler inspector has to have all three. In Minnesota, the National Board of Boilers and Pressure Vessels, or the National Board, they establish the rules for the repair of boilers here in our state. So anything that gets repaired and gets the R stamp on it has to meet the standards of the National Board. Now, in each boiler room, the state would like to see a current registration certificate, a proper boiler operator's license, and they would like to see boiler logs. So if you have a boiler room, I would encourage you to have all three of those: the registration certificate, the proper boiler operator license, and the logs that you keep for your boiler. Now, one thing you cannot do with your boiler logs is fill them out ahead of time. That would be cheating. You need to fill those out. So if you're in the middle of the month and the boiler inspector comes in and you got it filled out for the entire month, there's going to be problems. So stay honest about it. It's to your best interest, and there isn't a good boiler operator that would ever do that. There's a couple of terms that the boiler books didn't talk about, and I would want to talk to you about it just a little bit so you're familiar. But there's an abbreviated term called EDR, and it stands for equivalent square feet of direct radiation. And the EDR is used in calculating steam heat load situations. So if you have a steam coil, say in an air handler, or you got a steam coil that's just ceiling mounted with a fan behind it, or you have steam radiators, those will be rated in EDR. So EDR means equivalent square feet of direct radiation. In Minnesota, if you have high pressure, high temperature hot water boilers and they're converted to low pressure boilers, that has to be inspected by the state. But when that happens, when they go from high pressure to low pressure, the expansion or compression tanks have to be enlarged. So keep that in mind. And they also have to have the safety valves changed out. So you can't, if you go from high pressure to low pressure, there's some accessories and fittings on the boiler that have to change to match the new low pressure boiler. One being the expansion or compression tanks, and the other being the safety valves. Okay, well, that about does it for there. I want to talk a little bit about minimum and maximum sizes and being able to calculate the total force that is being applied to a safety valve. And I'm going to hold this little sheet up for a little bit of time so that you can see it. And these are some of the minimum and maximum sizes when it comes to pipes and so forth. Take a look at that. So down at the bottom has to do with calculating total force. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But I'll hold it there long enough so that you can get a good grip on it. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about calculating total force. If you're testing for one of the higher licenses in Minnesota, you will get tests on determining what the total force is on a safety valve. Now, to determine total force on a safety valve, we need to know what the area is. So if you got a 3-inch safety valve, you need to know what the square inches of area is of a 3-inch safety valve. This particular formula there will tell you how to do that. And there are also descriptions in the boiler books that can walk you through that. So total force is pressure, and we're talking low pressure boilers, so the pressure rating is going to be 15 psi. That doesn't mean that you're always running 15 psi, but that's the maximum that you can use, and that is the determining figure that you use for determining what your total force is. So you take the total force equals the pressure, which is 15 psi, times the area. And on area for a circular valve, which they all are, you take the diameter times the diameter, or diameter square, and then you multiply that by a decimal figure 0.7854. So keep that in mind. Then, of course, you take the pressure 15 times the total area, and that will give you the total force that the boiler can exert on that safety valve. Well, that's about it for this session for Minnesota. We've covered a lot of material here. I want you to make a good attempt at getting onto the website for the state and going through all the literature there, and that's where your applications are, that's where your affidavits are, and so forth. If you're testing for the initial license, which is the special license, then you do not need an affidavit because you've had no experience anyway. But second class, first class, and chief, you have to have the affidavit filled out by somebody attesting to the fact that you in fact had that experience. So keep that in mind. Without any additional things, I would wish you the very best. When it comes to passing a boiler test, luck isn't in the cards. You have to know the material. So go through these sessions. Read your books and study guides, apply yourself, go back through these sessions many times as you want, so you kind of get a full understanding of what you're dealing with. And then when you go in and take your test, you can be fully confident that you're going to get almost all of these questions right, hopefully, and at least pass your test and have a great understanding so that you'll be a good, safe boiler operator in Minnesota. Thank you for watching, and like I say, the very best wishes to you in obtaining your boiler license or your new boiler license.